It's been over a decade since Michigan was really Michigan, in the sense of being a Big Ten powerhouse, dominating teams around the country, and going to big-time bowls on a consistent basis. But what if that almost didn't happen? Hey lifers, Dustin here, and in this video I want to try to tackle that question by kind of wondering what would have happened if Les Miles had gone to be the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines in 2008. But before I get to that, if you enjoy this kind of college football content, I try to make it as much as possible. Make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and give this video a thumbs up if you end up enjoying it. Now, this video has been suggested before in the YouTube comments by longtime subscriber Blake Anderson, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that second one. I don't know how to say it. And before we actually talk about what if Les Miles had gone to Michigan, we need to briefly go over what actually happened in our timeline. Michigan started the 2007 season ranked number 5 in the preseason poll and promptly had probably the greatest upset in college football history in the home loss in the Big House to Appalachian State. They followed that up the next week with a blowout loss to Oregon. At the end of the season, head coach Lloyd Carr decided to call it quits and retire at the end of the season after 13 years as Michigan's head coach. His final game was a 6-point victory in the bowl game at the end of the season over number 9 Florida and their Heisman Trophy quarterback Tim Tebow. Florida at the time was in between national championships in the 2006 and the 2008 seasons. Meanwhile, down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, head coach Les Miles of the LSU Tigers was guiding LSU towards what would eventually become their second national championship in 5 seasons. Miles, who played offensive line for Michigan in 1974 and 1975, there were a lot of rumors swirling around that he would go to Michigan at the end of the season, especially after a second 3-overtime loss on the season, this time to Arkansas, that seemed to put LSU out of the national championship discussion in, without a doubt, the craziest season of college football in history. Hours before, LSU was set to play Tennessee in the 2007 SEC Championship game. Les Miles made an impromptu and emotional press conference appearance declaring that he would not be Michigan's next head coach, that he was intent on staying in Baton Rouge as LSU's head man, and famously signed it off by saying, "Have a great day." Later that night, LSU would go on to defeat Tennessee 21-14 to capture the SEC Championship and meet Michigan's arch nemesis and number 1 ranked Ohio State in the BCS National Championship game, which the Tigers would win. Almost immediately after the SEC Championship ended, the 100th Backyard Brawl kicked off in Morgantown, West Virginia, between the Mountaineers and the Pittsburgh Panthers. The Mountaineers were ranked number 2 at the time, and Pitt would go on to defeat them 13-9 to knock them out of a national championship game appearance. If you are interested in a college football what-if about that game, you can click the card right there. 2 weeks after that loss, West Virginia head coach RichRod had informed the team and the university that he had accepted the same position as head coach in Ann Arbor for the Michigan Wolverines. Unfortunately for RichRod, his system never exactly caught on in Ann Arbor, and he was let go after 3 seasons, posting an overall 15-22 record. He went on to be the head coach of the Arizona Wildcats, and after this past season, he was let go after some sexual misconduct allegations and a lawsuit. Les Miles won the 2011 SEC Championship game, posting a perfect regular season, and had another shot at yet another national championship, this time against his predecessor and Alabama head coach Nick Saban, because Nick Saban was voted number 2 in a very controversial decision, keeping Les Miles from facing his last team, Oklahoma State, and their head coach Mike Gundy. I also did a what-if on that. You can check that out right there. LSU is now coached by Coach Orgeron. That was a terrible, terrible impression. And Michigan has struggled a bit under previous head coach Brady Hoke and current head coach Jim Harbaugh, which hasn't quite met expectations. But what if that didn't happen? What if Les Miles did go to Michigan at the end of the 2007 season and kicked off 2008 in Ann Arbor as their head coach? What would that have looked like? Well, here's one possible scenario. From the start of the 2008 season all the way through 2017 season under 3 different head coaches, Michigan has amassed a record of just 74-53. Les Miles went 80-28 from the beginning of the 2008 season through his 2016 firing. So I think it's pretty safe to say that even in a more competitive conference during most of those years in the SEC, Les Miles' better record indicates he probably would have been able to do more at Michigan than at least Brady Hoke and RichRod would have been able to. In my humble opinion, I do not think Les Miles probably would have had a losing record in Ann Arbor. And I think Les Miles' biggest criticism in the SEC always was he wasn't able to update his offense to fit the growing, defense and offensive schemes in the SEC. In the Big Ten, I'm not sure that would have been as glaring of an issue as it was down in Louisiana. Most teams in the Big Ten are still pretty traditional. Yes, you've had some that have come and gone, such as RichRod at Michigan, whose system never really stuck, and you've had teams like Ohio State incorporate more up-tempo, depending on what quarterback they've had. But for the most part, I think Les Miles' definition of a Les Miles team is really strong defense, really strong running game, and the passing game can either be there or not, but they're going to win on defense. I think that would have worked better in the Big Ten than it ended up panning out for Les Miles in the SEC, and I think Michigan would probably have had a couple of Big Ten titles since 2008. Plus, we would have had a brand new 10 years war between Les Miles at Michigan and now Urban Meyer at Ohio State. They would have carried over their bad blood from the LSU-Florida rivalry, and it would have been great to see year in and year out. Maybe with the idea of being the head coach in Michigan taken off the table, a frustrated RichRod would have stayed in Morgantown for a little bit longer. If he had, as I mentioned in the other video, maybe West Virginia comes away with a national championship or two. Maybe West Virginia ends up joining the ACC instead of the Big 12. And if not, if he just wanted to get out of Morgantown no matter what, other big-name programs that were kind of available to start the 2008 season with coaching vacancies include Arkansas, Ole Miss, Nebraska, A&M, and UCLA. Maybe a program of those kind of calibers would have lured away RichRod anyway. Just think about the impact that would have had in the SEC alone. If RichRod had gone to Arkansas instead of Bobby Petrino, we wouldn't have had the whole motorcycle accident thing. If he'd have gone to Ole Miss instead of Houston Nutt, I doubt Hugh Freeze would have been the next head coach hired there, and Ole Miss probably wouldn't be looking down the barrel of NCAA sanctions right now. Here's a kind of crazy scenario. Maybe he sticks around West Virginia for another year, and then instead of Dabo Swinney getting the head job during the 2008 season, or after the 2008 season, maybe Clemson invites somebody like RichRod, who's a proven winner, who may be in the middle of the national championship run or was just shy of it at the end of the 2007 season, and served very well under Tommy Bowden as an offensive coordinator for the Tigers. Or maybe RichRod goes to a team like Oregon or Auburn. Even Tennessee would have been available. That's a pretty good gig. Well, now it's not. Now it looks like crap. But 10 years ago, that looked like a really great job following Philip Fulmer. There would have still been talent in the SEC. It would have been the SEC East, which we find out now, not at the time, but now we know is the weaker of the two divisions and has been for the last decade or so. RichRod may have been a very proven coach in the SEC if he'd taken the Tennessee job. And that brings up the question, who would have replaced Les Miles? Well, some coaches that were getting a lot of buzz at the time include Stanford's Jim Harbaugh. How about that for a switch? Harbaugh down at LSU and Les Miles up at Michigan. That seems kind of weird now, doesn't it? Rutgers' Greg Schiano, Boise State's Chris Peterson, and a little offensive coordinator from Oregon named Chip Kelly. So, at the end of the day, do I think that Les Miles in Michigan would have worked, would have been a good fit? I do. I think it would have really helped to restore the Michigan prestige that has been lost in my adulthood. I remember it in my childhood when they won the 97 title, but really, since the 2006 season when they lost to Ohio State, they haven't really impressed me that much, and they seem kind of like an old dynasty, though I know that's not true. They just need the right quarterback and the right head coach combination. But maybe Les Miles could have prevented that from happening. Maybe there would not have been a drop-off in Michigan. On the other hand, I do recognize that if Nick Saban had stayed with the Miami Dolphins, we probably would be sitting here talking about Les Miles as arguably the greatest head coach in the SEC other than Paul Bear Bryant. And Les Miles and LSU probably would have a couple of BCS national championships, maybe a couple of playoff appearances at this point if it wasn't for Alabama coming in and knocking them out. If you think about a lot of those years LSU was really, really good, one of their big losses, or a loss that kept them out of the SEC championship, was against Alabama, and eventually Les Miles just couldn't compete with Nick Saban, and I think that's ultimately why he was terminated at LSU. He was just behind Nick Saban, and that was unacceptable in Baton Rouge. If he had stayed there and Nick Saban had not come to the conference, maybe it would be an entirely different history written about Les Miles. But now I turn it over to you. Let me know what you think down below. Do you think any of these coaching swaps would have happened? Do you think, he could have restored Michigan, that Michigan would be in at least have a playoff appearance, at least a couple of Big Ten championships over the last decade? Do you think they would have taken the place of Ohio State during some of those BCS bowls? I don't know. Let me know what you think down below. Thank y'all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click on the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time. It's been over a decade since Michigan was really Michigan, in the sense of being a Big Ten powerhouse, dominating teams around the country, and going to big-time bowls on a consistent basis. But what if that almost didn't happen? Hey lifers, Dustin here, and in this video, I want to try to tackle that question by kind of wondering what would have happened if Les Miles had gone to be the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines in 2008. But before I get to that, if you enjoy this kind of college football content, I try to make it as much as possible. Make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and give this video a thumbs up if you end up enjoying it. Now, this video has been suggested before in the YouTube comments by longtime subscriber Blake Anderson, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that second one. I don't know how to say it. And before we actually talk about what if Les Miles had gone to Michigan, we need to briefly go over what actually happened in our timeline. Michigan started the 2007 season ranked number 5 in the preseason poll and promptly had probably the greatest upset in college football history in the home loss in the Big House to Appalachian State. They followed that up the next week with a blowout loss to Oregon. At the end of the season, head coach Lloyd Carr decided to call